Sure.
And then I think if you all want to start at any time, feel free.
Sure. Yeah, we can definitely start. All right, I will present. Oh, hold on 1 second. Let me share my screen first. Okay, can everyone see my screen? All right. Yeah, we can get started. So, hello everyone. We are Engineers Without Borders UIUC. Maybe we can all go around and introduce ourselves. I'm Lavanya and I'm co-president. Tavish?
We go next. I'm Tavish. I'm the external vice president.
I'm Jessica. I'm a project lead for our project in Hopkins Park, Illinois.
I'm Riley. I'm a project lead for our project in Malawi.
Yeah, awesome. So we're happy to present to you today contextual analysis in our Engineers Without Borders projects. But before we go into our presentation, I'd like to hand it off to Jess.
Thanks. Do you mind if I share my screen real quick for one slide?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Thanks. Could someone give me, oh wait, it wasn't showing up before, but I think I have it. Yeah, I'm good. It wasn't showing up. Okay. So hi, everyone. My name is Jess DeVries. I am from the University YMCA New American Welcome Center on campus. And I work, like I said, I work with our New American Welcome Center. So that is a program of the Y, and it is a program that is meant to serve immigrants in the Champaign-Urbana community and Champaign County at large. And we have many different programs to help immigrants thrive in our community, connect them to whatever resources they may be looking for when they get in contact with us. And one of the other aspects of our programming is we do a lot to try to make Champaign County just a more welcoming place in general for immigrants who may be looking to make home here. And one of the programs that we do that through is called Welcoming Week. So Welcoming Week is actually a global celebration that was started by Welcoming America about 10 years ago. And it happens usually the second week of September. So this year it's been the September 10th through September 19th. And a lot of different organizations in Champaign County come together to celebrate this week. So this year, there were over 20 different organizations participating with about 28 events that have been happening all week long. And the theme this year of Welcoming Week has been Belonging Begins with Us. And so it was kind of looking at just the idea that everyone knows how it feels to, at some point in your life, not feel like you belong in a space, but that we all also have the ability to welcome others and to make other people feel that sense of belonging when they're with us and when they're with our organizations. And so that's kind of been the theme of Welcoming Week. So I'm really excited for this event and just to see kind of what you've done with that idea. So I'll stop sharing my screen now, and I'll hand it back over to whoever's next.
All right, awesome. So let me share my screen again. All right. Okay, so as I said before, we'll be going over contextual analysis, which kind of stems from contextual engineering, which is a discipline that we'll be talking about later, that was coined by EWB's faculty advisor, Dr. Ann Whitmer. But before we do that, we'll talk a little bit about Engineers Without Borders, and we'll kind of explain. So Tavish, go ahead.
Yep. Okay. So Engineers Without Borders, we're Engineers Without Borders UIUC, and we're a subchapter of Engineers Without Borders USA, which is our parent organization. And our mission, I can just read through it real quick. We support community-driven programs worldwide by collaborating with local partners to design and implement sustainable infrastructure while creating transformative experiences and responsible leaders. And we work to provide contextualized engineering solutions around the world and build strong community partnerships. So what that kind of all means and how that plays into what we do is we're an organization that does humanitarian engineering projects in communities around the world, but some things that really set us apart from, say, like just being engineers that implement and build these projects is that our projects are all community driven and community owned. which means that we're really doing this for the community, and it's being led by the community and by their input and by what their needs are, rather than us like calling the shots and driving everything. And we make everything we do sustainable financially and economically, and also environmentally for the community. So this involves a lot of like thinking about our projects in the community shoes, which is something we'll talk a lot about later. And I think we really just take the ego out of engineering, because with what we do, it's meant to serve and help the people that we do our projects for. So yeah, we can go to the next slide. So these are just some of the types of projects that we do. Like we cover all sorts of areas like water supply, structures, sanitation, energy, civil works, and agriculture. So just everything related to kind of like building a community and a community's infrastructure. Right now, our projects, we have projects that are mainly focused on water, structures, and sanitation. And we've had other projects in the past. But yeah, the project leads, I think, are going to tell you more about what our projects do and what we have going right now later in the presentation.
Absolutely, thank you. So you learned a little bit about Engineers Without Borders, but the main point of our presentation today is to kind of show you how we as engineers kind of put a community aspect, technical and non-technical aspects together in a project, because it's not just the math and science that matters, but in working on all kinds of projects, but especially these ones which are community driven and owned, it's important to account for societal values and indigenous knowledge, as well as stakeholder motivations. So that'll all come into our next section, which is contextual engineering. So kind of going into why we care about context, we can look at these two pictures. I guess anyone on the call, I guess what differences do you see between the houses on the right and the left, first of all?
Just like what it is, like the front of it is made out of, I guess, is like different materials, different colors, windows versus no windows.
Exactly. Yeah. Just on first appearances, I guess. What can we say, or what can you, I guess, infer about the left house versus maybe inferences about the right house? Anybody?
Well, you can infer that the materials are not as sturdy or long lasting.
In which house?
The one on the left, my left.
Okay. What about the one on the right? Any observances? Oh, sorry. Maybe by first glance, it looks a little bit more sturdier, right? It's made out of masonry, or it's made out of some sort of concrete from first glance, maybe bricks, who knows, that's painted over. So definitely looks more sturdy, a little bit more put together than the house on the left. Am I right in like, first inferences? So I hope I explained this correctly, but these two pictures were taken from our Ecuador team. So the Ecuador team is working on a water distribution system in El Garango, Ecuador, and they took these two images when they traveled in January of 2020, so right before the pandemic hit. And they were very surprised to see these kinds of the separation, or like the differences between these two houses in the same community. So by first glance, we can say, oh, the left house is a little bit more shabby. It's a little bit more messy. Maybe it's not as sturdy as the house on the right. It's not as well put together, right? But in reality, Dr. Whitmer can probably explain this better than I can. But in reality, the house on the left is actually provides a much more cooler inside, because of the fact that it's made out of bamboo. So it definitely it regulates temperature, especially since Ecuador is on the equator, which means that there are very extreme weather conditions, right? Like very extreme rains, humidity, lots of heat. And so definitely that cooling mechanism as a part of the house is extremely helpful for its residents. Also, the house on the left is much more sturdy, and it's actually adaptable to these extreme weather conditions. So surprisingly, the Ecuador team learned that I guess like higher officials in the community actually lived in houses that are on the left, similar to those houses, because of the fact that they're much more withstanding to things like rains and earthquakes also. And the house on the right, although it looks sturdier, it's actually extremely hot and humid inside the house because of the fact that it's built out of masonry techniques, and it doesn't suit to those specific conditions. Also, surprisingly, both houses have things like sound systems, flat screen TVs, kind of modern technology that we might see in our own homes, although they don't look like it from the outside. And the house on the right was also given to this family by the government because their house had been destroyed by an earthquake, I believe. I forgot which year and which specific disaster. Jessica, you jump in if I'm missing anything. But yeah, do you want to add anything that I might have missed?
I think you covered it well, Lavanya. That's good.
Thank you. So as we can see, we cannot infer context just by first glance, right? We didn't know at first about the conditions, about societal conditions as well, not just climate. So we couldn't exactly make the correct inferences about these houses, which is why we care about context. So what is context? As I said, as I've mentioned the word conditions many times, it's the conditions of a place, specific people or set of people, or resident set of beliefs. So context is extremely important because whoever we are working for, the clients, they're ultimately the users of the system. And so we need to be cognizant of their values, their beliefs, and their needs before ours, right? Before imposing Western standards or technologies on specific communities, because of the fact that, you know, some communities may be self-sustaining, some communities may work better with limited technology, right? Because if they cannot maintain an extremely well-built technological system, then there's no point in spending a lot of money and time implementing it in their community. So the significance of context may not be apparent to the practitioner because of the fact that they need to research, they need to really delve into the conditions of the place and of the people in specific communities. But as the practitioner gets to know the users, then context becomes extremely relevant, which it always is in pretty much any situation. Even in our daily lives, context really matters in little ways. So yeah, context in one condition may not be transferable to other conditions and settings. So it's extremely important to really research the community before building some sort of context. So this is a diagram that we often use in contextual engineering, which is the implementation of this discipline of context. So we kind of go from a broader to a narrower approach when thinking about contextual engineering. So the first kind of level in the top-down system is global. We consider global influences that impact the client society. And I think the project leads might talk a little bit more about global conditions in our specific projects and in our specific communities that we're working with. But it's extremely important to think about, I guess, histories of the communities that we've worked with, climate and weather conditions in the past and in the present, things like societal and economic values that may have stemmed from, you know, centuries ago, cultural beliefs, right? And it really depends on kind of like a global impact makes a huge difference on even our communities. Then we go to specific location, place spaces. We examine the community's physical locations and conditions, which might include, again, more specific cultural identity. So maybe specific groups inside in a community. Even if we look at, you know, the city of Urbana or like the College of Urbana-Champaign, we have so many different groups on campus with various identities and cultures. And so we need to consider that even though we're all under one place, we still have so many differences. Then we go to the actual people. We explore the needs and motivations of all stakeholders, who are essentially all the people involved in a project or in an overarching goal. And then we go lastly to the engineering design process. Once we have an idea of the overarching conditions and a culmination of all these values and beliefs and technological needs even and non-technical needs, then we can actually use that comprehensive understanding to develop a sustainable solution that will work long-term and short-term for the community.
Thanks, Lavanya. That was a good overview of the contextual engineering process. So when we get into actually applying this process and projects, what we do is when we visit each community partner, we're assessing them based on 5 contextual influences, and it's kind of our way of characterizing each of these unique communities and can serve as a guide for decision making. So here's the 5 influences that we use. We start with political. So what we mean by that is not necessarily what are their political views, but rather what are the power dynamics in the community at play? Who has the power and how does that influence their functionality and their day-to-day life? And if your solution, if your infrastructure doesn't take into account these power dynamics and doesn't make sure that the person who has the power in the community is on board the whole time, then it risks rejection by the community, and then it's not going to sustain itself once the engineering team leaves. So that's a critical influence there. Economic influence is not how much money they have, but rather their perception of their ability to meet their needs. So a high economic influence would mean that you would want a low maintenance design that wouldn't require like maybe wouldn't have as many bells and whistles or things like that. If there's too many extra functions in your design that they don't think that they need, then it also risks rejection and they wouldn't sustain it over time or would do, it wouldn't fit their purposes as well. Cultural influence, what we mean by that is their shared identity. So a high cultural influence might mean that there's some constraints to your design. For example, if you're building a water system, there might be certain lands that are restricted or certain processes for treating the water that would go against their beliefs. And so if you pick a design that doesn't align with their values, then they wouldn't accept it, obviously. Educational influence is not how educated they are, but rather how much they seek knowledge and desire to learn. So a high educational influence would mean that you can get more experimental with your design and explore new approaches and learn together and have them be heavily involved in the design because it's community driven projects. And then the last influence, we call it mechanical, and it's pretty much how good are they with their hands? How quickly do they think on their feet? So if if there's a high mechanical influence, then you'll want to heavily involve the client in the design process and incorporate local techniques and local innovations to make sure that they're on board throughout the design process. And I'm going to hand it over to the project leads to talk about how we've used these influences and this contextual engineering process in each of our projects.
Oh, sorry. Oh no. Let's see if I can go back. Okay.
I think there should be one more slide. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So I am the project lead for the Para Los Mendes project in Guatemala. We are working on implementing a new bathroom system as their current facilities are not large enough to meet the capacity of the school. So it was adopted in September 2020. And we're currently working on the design and working with the community to on demolishing the old bathrooms. Our first assessment trip was in December 2020, and we had a second one in July 2021. So these assessment trips included site assessment, soil testing, elevation measurements, water quality, and those kind of things to get data on the current status of the site. And we're planning on implementing in December 2021. So one of the ways we're using contextual engineering in the project was when we first adopted the project, we just get like everything EWB USA knows about it. And one of those things was that the best course of kind of septic drainage for this project was well infiltration. That's not really typical in the States. We usually use drainage fields because we have more horizontal space. So our mentor team and our team in general really had no background on what this was. And when you think of well, you kind of think of water, and infiltration in this context is associated with sewage. So we were really confused on why something like well and sewage would be put together. So we really had to work with the community to see this in their context and how a well infiltration system is a better solution for their specific environment. And then on the left, you can kind of see our current design. We actually submitted this to EWB USA Monday for approval. And that thing, that kind of like gray tube thing, is actually a hole in the ground. And that'll kind of be how the outflow of the septic tank, that black thing, disperses into the ground, and how that septic system works.
It's a beautiful design, I have to say, beautiful CAD drawing.
And then another way we've been using contextual engineering, this was actually probably last Friday or so. One of the requirements for EWB USA Guatemala projects, specifically for sanitation, is they have a menstrual facility in the new bathrooms, which requires like a toilet and a sink. So with these menstrual facilities, we're assuming that the students would be using disposable products, and therefore only like a trash can would be necessary. But through looking through the EWB USA like database, we found a conversation and kind of like a design that implemented drying racks, which kind of told us that the students are using more like reusable products and menstrual cloths, and how our kind of culture and standards for the US were not applicable to Guatemala.
All right. Hello again. I'm the project lead for the Hopkins Park project, which is in Illinois. It's in Kankakee County, for those of you who know where that is. It's only about 90 minutes from campus. This project started in the spring of 2019, and our main goal has been the rehabilitation of their wastewater treatment plant. So we did assessment trips in 2019, 2020, and some this year as well. And the main thing we've been working on lately, which is actively in its approval process, is a preliminary engineering report where we assess project background, the current conditions of the facility, and then evaluate different options for rehabilitating the facility and proceeding with funding. So there's been plenty of examples of where we've used contextual engineering in Hopkins Park. Lauren, you'll go to the next slide. Perfect. So when we started working on this report, we were evaluating different alternatives, and there's different ways of illustrating the process that the water follows throughout the wastewater treatment plant and the different options there are. So the above picture is from the original engineering drawings that we received for the facility when it was built in 1987. And then the picture below is like an overhead shot of the Google Earth image of the facility. And so the one on top is kind of preferred by engineers because it has a lot more detail and you can kind of see all the different options, and that's the one that we're inclined to use to provide the best information. But when we have conversations with the community, we realize that they understand the system a lot more using the below picture, and it makes a lot more sense to them, and they're a lot more on board when we're using that. And so a decision we had to make when forming the report was, you know, if Hopkins Park is driving the project and doing the decision making, we need to make sure that we are using information that means the most to them. And so that was kind of an instance we were challenging our own engineering instincts and what we're taught in school to work with our community partner. So that's one example. And then another example was when we were getting background information about Hopkins Park and kind of projecting what will be the needs of this wastewater treatment plant farther down the line. You know, how is the population of Hopkins Park going to change over time? How big do we need the facility to be? We are inclined to use census data, and that's usually considered trustworthy and official. And so what that data told us is that the Hopkins Park population is going to just keep decreasing. So maybe we want a smaller facility with a little less capacity than it was originally built with. But then whenever you actually visit Hopkins Park and you talk to the mayor and other people in Hopkins Park, it paints a completely different story from all the information you can read online. You hear that the community has actually been growing over the past few years and will continue to grow. And they recently had a bill signed to put in a natural gas pipeline in the community, which can bring in new businesses and also more community growth. And so that would tell us that actually the population is going to go upward and we might want to upsize the facility. And so that's another case where we're, you know, challenging our own instincts as engineers to trust the like official online tangible numbers versus valuable information from the community and firsthand experience of what's happening there. So yeah, but plenty of opportunities for context in Hopkins Park.
All right, so to go a little bit over the Malawi project, some background with our project. Malawi deals with a lot of issues with their monsoon season, and they have a access point in their community which becomes inaccessible during that time period. So that was one of the main motivations for our project. So the project tackles the design of a bridge over the Lunzu River due to these floods that happen in the community. It gives them access to several points that they need access to. As I said, the community is made up of 20,000 people from 11 different villages. And then we're in the process of working on the first of 3 bridges, with this first one being over the Lunzu River. We have had assessment trips in the past as well. Some of the information we've gotten is soil geotechnical data, elevation data, and we've also been able to draft a memorandum of understanding, which we'll see in slides to come. So in regards to the Malawi project with contextual engineering, it's definitely been something that we found to be really relevant, especially recently with some of our contact. There's been a lot of political turmoil, so that's something that we've had to keep in mind. But one of the main things was having an understanding of community access and use of different materials. The materials that are most accessible in the community aren't necessarily the same materials that we would typically use. Sand, rock, and brick are some of these examples and are big in the economic sustainability of the community. But also, as you can see in the picture on the left, this is a bridge that was implemented in the community, and it has a steel deck and concrete abutments. So it's important that when designing a bridge, the bridge is sustainable for the community. If we built a bridge and the community didn't have the ability to sustain it over time, then it wouldn't be worth creating the project. So that's where contextual engineering comes into play. However, we must also have the ability to consider potential alternatives in our design that would come through contextual engineering and learning from the community. And then finally, considering means of transportation. There's very limited automobiles within the community, but there's a lot more of an emphasis on pedestrian and bicycle transportation, which is why we're pursuing the design of a footbridge. And then, as I mentioned before, the memorandum of understanding was drafted between the community, the NGO, and EWB UIUC as a means of sort of having a general idea of what each sector of the project was willing to contribute. So some of the main emphasis was that the community would provide 5% of the funding, with EWB providing 95% of the funding. The memorandum of understanding also directly tackles contextual engineering through taking into account the needs of the community. We also talk about our NGO and the facilitation of our material purchases, storage of materials, and construction process. So the memorandum of understanding was a great way for us to very clearly establish what the goals were for the community in this project.
Thank you, project leads. Yeah, that was a great overview from all of you about how we use contextual analysis. And our chapter is actually one of the unique ones because, we're lucky that Dr. Whitmer introduced us and taught us all about contextual engineering, and we're able to use that in our projects. And as you can see, it has a large impact on the design or potential design, as well as alternatives analysis and just general knowledge about the community and the project. So we have a breakout session activity, but we might just do it as a whole group here. It's a pretty fun activity where we'll kind of look at different scenarios about relating to the 5 influences. We're going to have a few scenarios. So kind of to go over the general like rules or the general, what do you say, scenario of the discussion. We're going to be exploring a fictional water distribution system in Honduras. So we'll be thinking about, the fact if we were to assist in the design of a water distribution system for a rural community in Honduras. So the task is to create a pipe route from a water tank to different houses in a community of about 1,000 people. The preliminary design has put together a design given information that has already been researched or from another stakeholder, which is the NGO in this case. But now that, potentially if you visited the community and you actually see what's going on, and maybe you talk to people, observe some of the conditions and make observations, things might change about the way that you view the project and about maybe how the trajectory of the project will go. So let's start with a cultural influence. So again, this is a water distribution system. So we explained to the community that bacteria lives in water that flows in a stream, so people shouldn't drink it without treating it first. However, the members are a little bit skeptical. Why would Mother Earth give us water that is unsafe to drink? She provides all that we need. So kind of like using not just technical, but also non-technical influences and knowledge. Kind of what would the next steps in the design process be when accounting for this situation, right? Because if one member feels this way, there's a large chance that other members of the community will also feel this way. Anyone have any thoughts? Anyone can share.
I don't know. Maybe like talking with this person or other people just about like common ways that their water can be polluted. If there's like a way to show like like some things that could be added to the water that wouldn't just be there naturally or something like that.
Right, and we would know that from our technical knowledge. In their mind, it's like I guess treating it is kind of like contaminating the water in their mind, right? Because you're tampering with something that is purely natural, right? That's given to us by Mother Earth. So I guess how would you approach that situation when thinking about it in that way?
I think when I was saying that, I meant like looking around at the area with the person and like looking for things that might be a pollutant. Maybe there isn't anything like that, but I think that's where I was at in my head, like actually together exploring and seeing like, are there things that are actually in your water that weren't there naturally, that could be like seen like that, but maybe that's just not the scenario here. So
yeah, that would make sense, right? Maybe, educate them a little bit more. That's definitely one possible way to go forward. Anybody else?
This may further complicate the situation, but I was thinking maybe bringing to light like causes of death. Like, I don't know what kind of bacteria this is, but if they're seeing the effects of it in their community and tracing it back to the cause, and just sharing like that this isn't something that's just happening where they live, it happens all over the world, and that's why people typically treat their water, so that the life expectancy is longer and people aren't affected. I don't know, that could lead into like a deeper and deeper conversation that maybe wouldn't be productive. It would just depend on the group of people and the trust built between the individuals working in the community itself.
That's interesting. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting perspective. Like maybe it'd be worth asking them, do you ever like feel unwell after drinking this water or ever have any like symptoms that maybe you're getting sick from the water? But maybe they like never made the connection before and kind of tackle it that way.
Right, I went kind of drastic with it being fatal. Maybe it does just cause like their stomach to hurt or something like that. It could definitely be a lot more mild. I'm sorry for taking it so drastic.
No, you're good.
That's a good.
No, that's a good perspective though. It's
Yeah, it really is. It's a very interesting perspective because like you wouldn't be dispelling their argument, right, or their cultural beliefs, but more making them maybe think about other effects that come with that water, right? So instead of like disproving them, it might be, have you thought about this? Anyone else?
I was thinking like, especially going off of those, it could be useful to talk to the other people in the community and make sure everyone feels this way. But even if they do, maybe find if like even one member of the community kind of is between like your point of view and their point of view and kind of can act as the bridge between you guys. Especially like if they have more knowledge of the outside world or some of the other stuff you guys were saying.
Absolutely. Actually, going off of that, Tavish, let me pose to you guys another question then. What if this one member, for example, was a higher authority? Like, for example, maybe like a person of power in the community, a chief or something like that, right? Versus a regular member per se in the community, maybe just a resident. I guess how would that come into play in this sort of situation? Would it matter like what the next steps would be if we consider one versus another?
I think it could definitely be a little bit more delicate if it's someone with high power in the community, because if you like to take Tavish's example, if you find someone with a different viewpoint and try to like use them to persuade the opinion in a different direction, that could be perceived as like going behind their back or like betraying them and could compromise your trust with them. So I don't know if anyone else has any other thoughts.
Yeah, because messing with authority could be, kind of disagreeing with a major stakeholder, right? Especially if that person is making the decision for this water facility. So yeah, that's interesting. Anyone else?
Well, one of the things that I was thinking about, and I think this could also be asked of someone in a position of authority, but in a lot of contexts, a lot of cultures, there are explanations as to why nature has changed around us. And so I would just ask, there's another way to phrase this, but what has the general or the generational wisdom or knowledge around water, how has that changed over time? And see if there's some comparison to how water was 2 generations ago versus now. And I think having the person that you are talking with kind of explain how the water may have changed over the course of generations can also be a great opportunity to talk about some of the reasons why why the water could have changed in addition to the cultural explanations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely generational beliefs definitely play a role, a huge role in a lot of decision making, for sure. Yeah, these are all really good points. Awesome. Does anyone have any other thoughts? Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was actually like initially wondering if there, I don't know if this would be considered like cheating. Is there a way to like treat water without putting something in it? Like maybe there's a compromise, like still treating the water, but you're not adding something to the water. Like there's UV treatment. I know that's a little bit more of an advanced one, but maybe exploring something like that.
I was gonna
I
say,
don't know.
like, I think I've seen, I know there's at least a few places where I've seen like communities that treat their water using like only natural or herbal methods that even like were pre-existing in nature that they just discovered. So
Yeah, for sure. I think that would be harmonizing both sides, right? The engineers who want to, treat the water, and also the community who don't. But would that still be considered tampering, right? Even if it's because you're taking something out of the water, right? Out of the natural water, would that still be, I guess, tampering with the water? Because if it is, I mean, like, I think that's a better solution than putting something in the water, but still, I don't know. Yeah. Same. All right. Great. Does anyone have anything else to add? This is really good. All right. Ooh. All right. So now we have another scenario in considering the same engineering solution, but this time we'll kind of dive into the political influence. So let's say that the community is kind of separated into a couple of zones, right? So we have maybe if you imagine a hill kind of going like this, maybe there are some houses that are on the top of the hill, some houses on the lower level, maybe some in the middle, depending on how it's structured, right? Depending on how the community was developed. So the upper zone of the community lies at a higher elevation than the spring from which the community draws water, which means that the water cannot be piped to this sector without a pump. So if you have like a water source here, there would have to be, it would have to basically push against gravity, right, to be pumped up to these higher elevated houses. So the village leaders tell you that those residents shouldn't have built the houses there anyway, so it's their problem and not the village's. Keep in mind that like maybe a lot of these residents are not economically well off, right? They may not be well off. We don't know their economic status, so they may or may not be able to pay for a lot of these changes that might have to be made, or these additions, for example, pumps, which might be a huge technical expense for them. So again, I pose the same question. What should the next steps in the design process be when accounting for the above situation? Specifically, when village leaders say, oh, it's the residents' problem, not ours. But you're looking at an integral source like water, right? The village people cannot live without water. So what do you say?
I guess one of the first things that I sort of thought of thinking about it was maybe surveying the people that live in that area, and then finding a way to make it so it is relevant to the village leaders, because if you can figure out, maybe how those people contribute to the community as a whole, whether it's through like economically, like what jobs they have, like positions of labor for the community. If you can get that like detailed information and bring it back to the leader of the community and just be like, without, a sustainable water source, these people aren't going to be able to thrive and it'll hurt the greater community. That might be a good way to approach it.
Yeah, absolutely. Surveying people would be great to know the residents, how they feel about it, so that you can make a stronger case for possibly money flowing from a higher authority for this like technical pump system. Anyone else?
I just want to say I want to second that idea, or I really like that idea, because I feel like it's at least as engineers, our most important role is to inform like our community partner of like what we see the possible I don't want to say consequences, but like results of the decisions that they make. So it's less about trying to change their mind and more about just giving them more information on what might happen if they decide to not give water to those houses. So that's cool.
I agree. I totally agree.
I just want to say, like, I think it's interesting the way that like being an engineer in this position forces you to have to find a solution. And like, say you want the whole community to have water, you have to find a way to like make a case for this, but you have to do that while simultaneously like putting your moral drive aside. And do it like using only information and like be clever about it, which is like just takes a lot of different skill sets and ties it into one.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much difference in information flow and I guess decision making in this case. So yeah, for sure. Anyone else want to share thoughts?
I'm just rolling with what was already suggested, but I'm a little apprehensive about the idea because I feel like if you were like trying to build trust with the community leaders and then they were like, that's not actually a problem, and then you were like, okay, I'm gonna go talk to everybody else about it. I'm just not sure how that would go over. So not a good suggestion, but just thinking about the logistics of like surveying the entire community to build evidence or whatever, and how that would actually go over, because I doubt you could just like do it in a day without being noticed. It would probably be a pretty lengthy procedure.
Yeah, I agree. That's like a pretty, that's like really contextual, like thinking contextually, because yeah, you're trying to establish rapport with the community leaders possibly because they hold a major stake in the project, they're a major stakeholder. And so yeah, it might form some distrust among them depending on how the community leaders take it, right? Because like different community leaders might think differently, especially if they're kind of detached from the residents. So yeah, yeah, definitely you have to kind of consider before surveying, although like surveying is an awesome idea, definitely have to consider consequences.
Yeah, I think that was a really good point. Actually ties well with what Tavish said about like kind of the motivations. Like we
Yeah.
have to think about what's motivating our decision making. So if us deciding to get more information from residents is entirely led by our like innate want to serve the entire community and not necessarily like what the leaders have in mind, then I have to think about whether it's a good idea to pursue that action. So very cool.
Kind of like,
All great. Oh,
you
yeah.
can go, Jess.
I was just gonna say, and also depending on the situation, people who talk to you could potentially be putting themselves at risk too, like depending on who the leader is and how they might react.
Oh yeah.
I was gonna say, like, kind of spinning off what Cynthia said. What is your guys' like opinion on, say, a period of time has passed and there's no way, like, we haven't been able to get the leaders to come to an agreement to give water to that higher place, but the leaders still need the water system that we're going to implement for like their own needs and for the rest of the community. What do you guys think about if we were to say, like, either you're going to let us implement the system for the whole community or not implement it at all? Because like in EWB, we talk about like if something goes against your ethical standards, sometimes you just have to like leave the project.
That's a good question. Yeah, I'm interested to hear responses.
Yeah, I was thinking about like what are some of the root causes for the village leaders being okay with the homes being built in that area in the first place? Like thinking, are there prejudices at play, discrimination at play? Are there differences among groups, like trying to understand exactly why village leaders are okay with that? Because I don't know, I'm leaning towards it's not as simple as, oh, they wanted to build it over there, so oh well, there has to be some deeper meaning. And that can relate to what you brought up, Tavish, about what does that mean ethically and morally? And now I'm just answering this now, and I forgot your how you worded the question, but I think if if there's the denial of essential resources to parts of the community, I mean, I would be tempted to be like, hey, can we try to figure out a way so that we can provide this resource for everyone, because if not, then I might have to throw up the deuces. So, yeah.
I really like what you said about like that it's probably not likely that the residents just decided to build the houses there. That's
Yes, I second that. I agree. That was a great point. Anyone else? This is a really good discussion, by the way. All right. Awesome. So we have one more scenario. Now we're going to kind of dip into the educational influence, which remember is essentially the community's willingness to learn. It could be willingness to learn new technologies, could be explorations of new innovations and new techniques and things like that. So it is not educational level, which is something that we got confused the first time we learned about what educational influence was. So just wanted to clear that up. So let's say when you pull out a wrench to adjust a setting on your equipment, a child in the community asks what you're doing. Within minutes, other children have joined the child, testing the wrench and everything they can find, using it for different purposes, such as measuring branch diameters and opening soda bottle caps. So I guess we can talk about next steps in the design process, but we can also say, like, what do you think about this? Like, what does this indicate about the community?
I would say, since we were talking about with the educational influence, it's about willingness to learn. And I think, seeing the children so eager to use the equipment, that definitely shows a willingness to learn within the community, at least with the children. So I'd say that this scenario, just witnessing this happen would be a good sign for like the community willingness with the project.
Yeah, I agree. I was just gonna say, like, I would take it a step farther and say that the children learned it from somewhere. So it's likely that the adults in the community have like the same tendencies and interests.
I definitely agree with both of you. I do have to ask, children are more innately curious than adults, right? I guess curiosity, like I was a very curious child and that continues to today. So like, I don't know, maybe it does. Maybe if you're a curious child, you're also a curious adult. But I guess in a more general sense, children are more curious than adults. So like, can we infer that? Can we like possibly infer that it came from somewhere? Because I guess there's like two ways to answer that depending on, I guess, how you think about it.
I think I was thinking yes, but also because of how, if I got the definition right from what you said before, how it ties into that mechanical piece too, like the fact that it's tools that they're using to then like in kind of the proper way from what they've seen use them. I think like those two things together, I would be inclined to say yes, but that's just me.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So,
guess-
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no worries. Yeah. The contrary to that might be like, and like even something we see in the US with generational differences, but like the children just haven't had any exposure to these kind of tools and equipment and activities before, maybe even more so because the community isn't very receptive to them. So this is kind of the first opportunity they've had to engage with it. And they're just like have that innate curiosity to do so.
That's a good point.
Definitely different ways of thinking about it for sure. Yeah. So I guess, can we say that the community has a high educational influence just from this situation, or maybe would we have to explore a lot more?
I would kind of think like it would, I don't know if you can just directly infer that they have a high educational influence, but it's enough to like make it worth investigating for sure.
Definitely. Yeah. Anyone else have anything to say? Awesome. So that pretty much wraps up our time. And yeah, I have to say, like, this was a great discussion. Thank you to, of course, all our presenters. You guys did an awesome job. Thank you so much to the University Y. Jess Akuya, thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak at this event. And yeah, we hope it was enjoyable and informative. I know we always learn from whenever we like talk about contextual engineering, whether it's in our projects or whether it's, at these types of events. So it's always enjoyable for us. But yeah, thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you all. This was really, really interesting. I really enjoy when I get to go to presentations by different student organizations, because usually you have such a specific viewpoint, and it's usually very different from anything that I learned when I was in school, that I always learn a lot. So thank you.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you all. And yeah, have a great night.
Yeah, you too. I'll stop the recording.